Thank you, Jason. Good evening. I call this meeting to order. Today we have one item in the agenda, ending structural racism and achieving equity. I would like to welcome Preeti Schroeder, Deputy Public Affairs Administrator, and Benita Horn, Inclusion and Equity Consultant with the City of Renton. Welcome both of you, and thank you for joining us today.
Thank you very much, Council President Perez, Council members. It's my pleasure to be here today. When the Council referred to the administration to come back with options to strengthen our stand against racism and to come back to support equity and inclusion, we did a lot of research and have come back to you and provided you with some documents, and also are really pleased to come back with some recommendations today, both in terms of a resolution as well as with a plan and strategy. So I want to give you a little bit of background and information on what we've come back with, and then also turn it over to Benita, who will walk you through with the rest of the session today. So some of the things we provided for you, as you would see, is an overview of some of the inclusion efforts that the city has undertaken. I will not spend too much time going through those details, but you can interrupt me at any time if you have any questions on some of the documents you have. But some of the things that I do want to bring your attention to is in your package, you would see that we had a timeline, and one of the timeline has a document, and I may not be excellent at sharing my screen, and I don't know if you can help me do that. She disabled it. Anyway, I don't need to share my screen, I can talk. One of the documents, and we talked about this at our council retreat also, was a timeline which showed all the various things that we have done pretty much since before 2008. And some of the things, one of them was really that in Renton, inclusion and equity and looking against racism has been something we've embedded both internally and externally as part of what we've done. We've looked at it not as something on the side, but as something that has been very much inculcated as part of our strategy. And this is where our business plan has been very, very critical and important. And it's been kind of the marching document. It's the most important policy document which the council adopts and the council uses both in terms of establishing policy and, most importantly, designating the budget for the city on which all city services, capital budgets, etc., have been established for the city. And in 2012, Renton was probably one of the first, if not the only city where inclusion was made front and center as part of the mission statement. And we've had, cities around the area look at us as kind of a poster child for doing that. So today, as we take your orders to say, how can we enhance this, commitment to racism, we're bringing back recommendations on how you will take what you've done before and, in fact, take it even a step further.
Preeti, can I interrupt you for just a moment? I've given you access rights to share your screen. You might try doing that.
Okay, thank you. The other thing that I want to state is included in this strategy in 2017 and included in the documents that you will have with you is in 2017, the City Council again adopted a proclamation to specifically stand against racism. So again, as we were doing our research and putting this together in the resolution that we bring to you, we have taken language from there that, again, you have adopted to take that very strong stand and added it, for you to look at. As the city attorney and the mayor advised, you do have the opportunity today to add further recitals on that as you look at. I'm going to try to share screen. I don't want to take time from what Benita is going to do, which is walk through the work we did to actually walk you through the differences in the business plan, which are the specific emphasis on, walking the racism areas and changes that we promote, which we bring to you today, and also a little bit more on the mayor's inclusion task force. These were conversations I know we had in detail during the council retreat. But I wanted to take a moment to can you see my screen? Are you able to, council members, are you able to see my?
Yes,
Yes.
we can now.
And is it the timeline?
Yes.
Oh, good. So I, like I said, I don't want to walk through talk about each and every one of these, but this is something you have seen before, but it just captures the length and breadth of the efforts that, Renton as a city has undertaken to look at equity, inclusion, working through, from the police department to address relationships and racism, to look at the Renton equity lens so that it is across the length and breadth of the different policies and services. One of our successful factors has been human resources, our tactical plan, and of course, the Mayor's Inclusion Task Force that has evolved, not just as representatives to take information out, but as much to bring in the needs. Last year, they were very, very critical in bringing policy direction from the Senior Advisory Task Force, the Pro Parks Task Force, to housing strategies for the city, and really look at the way that, we as a city function, because recognizing that we are a city with a lot of different, changing communities. With that, I will pass this forward to Benita, but she's going to talk a little bit more about working through, our recommendations and what we propose to you with the next step of the business plan. And council, since we're talking a broader scope of the business plan, there were some suggestions that had come up during the council retreat. And what I wanted to share is, since this is a 5-year business plan in terms of words and wording, that, we can collectively make a decision on, this year with the emphasis and focus on racial equity. I believe the collective understanding is, let's emphasize this. But, as staff, if we need to address some of the other issues, we can do so at a later stage. In your packet, we have provided you with some other graphic options as well, but we will finalize these after our meeting today when the council is in agreement on the direction we want to go. So with that, I turn it to Benita.
Thank you. And I just want, before I walk you through our recommended changes in the goal of inclusion in the business plan, I just wanted to share a few thoughts with you as your consultant. When I was initially hired by the mayor, I was tasked to be a resource to all of the departments in their work of really moving the needle on the goal of inclusion. And as I've worked in many various jurisdictions, I've learned that one thing that has set Renton apart from other jurisdictions and even organizations in which I've worked as a consultant is that the driver for equity is the Renton business plan. And I don't have to tell you, but I just need I want to share with you what I share with my other clients, that this document is co-created and supported by all city leaders, elected and appointed. It sets both the priorities for city leaders and it sets resources allocated by the city. Some jurisdictions in which I have worked have used drivers such as initiatives or proclamations that do not tend to influence day-to-day decisions of leaders. It tends to provide the space for some leaders to simply opt out of the initiative, and it does not direct or influence resources, nor do they propel or sustain policy or organizational culture changes that support movement toward racial equity. In 2016, I supported city leaders and administrators in creating an equity lens for Renton. And the equity lens is a decision-making process that centers those most impacted by the policy or issue. An equity lens is a vehicle for sharing power in decision-making. And that has been used by many departments in many different instances already. The Mayor's Inclusion Task Force is the policy advisory board that is regularly consulted by departments to make certain that the voices of those most impacted weigh in on decisions and policies using the equity lens. The task force as a body strives to represent the faces of the Renton community, and you can see that in the photo that Preeti has displayed. And I just want to share with you a few examples, and some of you may be aware of these, but I'm also cognizant of the fact that we do have newer council members, and so I want to make sure you all have the same base understanding of some of the things that have happened over the last years. 5 years ago, the police chief and a pastor from the African American community forged a partnership of African American pastors and police, whose vision is to create a community of trust through collaborative efforts and partnerships. And recently, the mayor and police chief met with members of this group and agreed on a joint review of current police policy. Human Resources consulted the task force about changes in the hiring policy and incorporated the input that they received into their hiring policy and process revisions. 3 years ago, when fear and anxiety skyrocketed in the Latino Hispanic community due to federal immigration policy and ICE actions, a task force member, along with the mayor, convened a forum of community members, now calling themselves the Latino Community Forum, to advise the city and police on actions that they felt would assuage the concerns of the community. The Community Services Renton Senior Activity Center partnered with task force members to engage elders in immigrant and Black, Indigenous, and people of color communities who rarely, if ever, use that center for ways to, they engage them to ask them about the ways in which services are provided and learn from them where they felt services can more effectively be provided and what services can be provided. The Community Services Parks and Recreation consulted the task force about changes in the Parks, Recreation, and Natural Areas Plan, and task force members went out into their respective communities and again engaged residents whose voices are seldom heard to provide input into that plan, which will determine resources that will be allocated over a number of years. Earlier this year, a task force member arranged for the mayor and police chief to meet with members of the Asian community and elected officials who are Asian American to find ways to address harm caused to the Asian community in Renton as a result of stereotypes and misinformation related to COVID-19. And then just recently, the Community and Economic Development Department met with the task force seeking policy input on their new housing action plan, and that will be an ongoing discussion. It's just begun. There's more details, of course, in your packet in the annual report for 2019 that the task force just recently submitted to the mayor. But what I want you to hopefully see just from those examples, and that's not all inclusive, is how you have, through the task force, a vehicle for shaping policy that includes the voices of the community. And it has been quite effective and has a track record of doing so. So, given the direction that we received from Council and the discussion, the rigorous discussion on the goal of inclusion that took place at Council Retreat in February this year, and as Preeti said, doing a lot of research and talking to a lot of people, we have proposed some revisions for your consideration in the goal of inclusion. And Preeti, I don't know if you can bring that up on your screen that has the, what the current goal says and what we're proposing. One of the things that we're proposing is, and you have it in your packet, and Preeti will have it on the screen in a moment, but right now I just want to kind of go through the highlights. So the current goal for inclusion reads, building an inclusive, informed city with opportunities for all. And the change that we're recommending is one that says, building an inclusive, informed city with equitable outcomes for all, which is a very different intent than just to say opportunities. Outcomes are what people, the final result, the impact on the community. Whereas opportunities simply means we open the door. So we want you to consider the wording, the subtle nuance in that. If you look at the column on the right, which is the proposed changes, because we moved what had been the first strategy, we moved it down one. And we show an initial strategy that says, achieve equitable outcomes by eliminating racial and social barriers in internal policies, city programs, services, and policies such as hiring and contracting. So that's a new strategy under the goal of inclusion. And I might mention that there are now 5 strategies. All of the other goals have 5 strategies. So there is alignment there. The second strategy now is what had been the first one with some slight, which says basically, it did say improve access to city services, programs, and employment, and make residents and businesses aware of opportunities to be involved with their community. So that is still the same. What had been the third strategy has really been included in what is now the fourth strategy. Excuse me. Let me just take them in order so we can stay together. The next strategy says promote understanding and appreciation of our diversity through celebrations and festivals. And one of the things that we did was we really took that strategy and put parts of it in 2 strategies on the proposed column. One says, the next one says, promote understanding and appreciation of our diversity through celebrations, educational forums, and festivals. So it is about celebrating, but it is also about educating each other. And the architects of the Renton Multicultural Festival, who are members of the Inclusion Task Force, set that as one of their initial goals. How do we help shape and promote better understanding? How do we educate each other about our communities? So we felt that was an important aspect to capture. The next strategy then on the proposed side says continue ongoing two-way dialogue with all communities, engage those historically marginalized, and ensure that we listen and take action on what we learn. So that's really is taking the former second strategy, which was, the fourth strategy, provide critical and relevant information, excuse me, information on a timely basis and facilitate two-way dialogue. This goes a step further than that, which specifically speaks of those we want to make sure are included in those dialogues and the city's responsibility of listening to what is shared and taking action. And then the last strategy here is a new one, and it actually parallels one of the strategies that was assigned in my scope of work as your consultant, which is to build capacity within the city to implement inclusion by providing the knowledge, skills, awareness, and tools to integrate inclusion into daily work. So I've done a lot of talking. And we really, Preeti, do you want to, before we open it to discussion, to our council, do you want to talk about the proposed proclamation? And then you can answer any questions that you have at any time we'll address.
I'd like to add just a couple things. First, for council members, as we were walking through some of these statements, we also took into consideration the information provided by Council Member Benedetti in terms of the United Libraries Council statement. I did not provide a link to that. That was a website link, but that was another very, very well documented overall statement for the Libraries Council. So we researched that as well as the Evanston statement. Some of our overriding goals was to look at equity. This was something when in 2012 and 2015, when we had looked at our inclusion statement, we had not spent as much time in looking at equity and equitable outcomes, but that was one of our overriding goals to make sure, because we've advanced so much in what we've done. So I do want you to be mindful that that was something that we really looked at. So it's not just about playing with words, but looking at equity, looking at outcomes, and really looking at this two-way interaction with our different communities so that we don't only listen, but we make a difference, and then we are accounting back to them. So we really spend time in the power of, are we answerable? Are we looking at communities that have not had a voice before, and are we making a difference? So we did try to spend time to have that as our guiding factor. And we spent a lot of time trying to do that, two of us, and then taking it back to the mayor, taking it back to the department heads. But of course, now bringing it to you so that we can get your input as well. So it was not just about playing with a document or a report, but really being mindful of that. So that's kind of what I wanted to share. I can now take us to the next document, which is the resolution, where you take these action items, but then also take the stand saying, as a city, we really want to make a statement in terms of standing up to support equity and stand up against racism, so that we're all marching towards the same value system. And that's the resolution, and obviously that's something that the city attorney can also help guide us in terms of, what's the statement we make. But, we took the liberty of taking something that we've already stated as a city, but providing that to you if you want to go anything further. And then, of course, with all these, anything that you would like to provide as your input, because these are your marching orders, for the city, for the community.
I see Councilmember Prince has his hand raised.
Madam President.
Yeah, sorry, Councilmember. For some reason I cannot see you. Yes, Councilmember Prince.
Thank you. I just wanted to compliment you guys on this exhaustive work. And when I think about what we're looking for in our communities as far as real structural change, this really, to me, hits the mark as far as what we're looking for. And I think as our community hears about what we're doing with our business plan, they'll see this as more of a structural, what the city of Renton is doing to walk its talk as far as equity, diversity, and inclusion. Before we started talking about the proclamation that you all were talking about, I just wanted to make sure that I made that point. So I want to applaud you guys and thank you for the hard work you've done to get this done.
Thank you very much, Councilmember Prince. Pretty Benita?
I see on my screen that Councilmember Kim also has her hand raised.
Okay, thank you. Councilmember Van?
Yes, thank you, Council President. Wanted to echo Councilmember Prince's words that I very much appreciate Ms. Benita Horn and Ms. Preeti for doing research and putting a lot of work into this. And I do want, if this is the time, rather than we wait until going through the resolution itself to talk about these points. But certainly I think that thank you all so much for all your work. There are some things that I would like to point out for the proposed inclusion goal. And if that's okay right now, or do you want to do it after the resolution is presented?
Go ahead, Councilmember Van.
Okay, great. Yeah, and again, I appreciate all the work that's been put into this. Again, I'm always a resource to our staff and to our council members. Fortunately, I was not contacted, but I see that how our city works is that we have our business plan, and that's kind of like our go-to, and this is the natural next step after the resolution of commitment and structural racism and achieve racial equity that was passed on theory last 3 weeks ago. So I see that now we're going to this. So I'm a little confused on that regard, which I'll ask about that in a second. But for the proposed inclusion goal, I applaud staff and those who've worked on this in regarding to adding the word equity, because at council retreat, like I mentioned, the word equity was not even in our business plan, although I know that it's part of our DNA and we've been doing the work. But just as a top, the caption, build an inclusive, informed city with equitable outcomes for all. As Ms. Benita Horn mentioned, we are focused in centering marginalized communities and communities that need to quote unquote catch up because of the institutionalized racism and the structural systematic barriers. So I actually don't agree with having the word for all. They're just that it does not speak true to what we're really trying to get to making it equitable. And right after that, I know that we put the achieve equitable outcomes by eliminating racial and social barriers in internal practices and so forth. I would like us to add in the word achieve racial equitable outcomes, because most of the things we're talking about, we're ending structural racism and what have been, whether intentional or not, had been targeted towards folks that have certain racial makeup, right? So I would like us to put the word racial right before equitable. I appreciate the phrase of improving access to city services. I don't know where to put this particular phrase, but I like to, for us, because I've spoken to community as well, and for us to put in the word eradicate racial disparities. So I would need Ms. Benita Horn to help me on that part as to put eradicating racial disparities. The last point, when it says build capacity within the city to implement inclusion by providing the knowledge and skills, I like to add, whether we add the term eradicating racial disparity in that phrase or add something more than just inclusion. Because when we talk about inclusion, I think that is definitely the initial step, is to include people at the table and to hear their stories and you know, to build that relationship. However, there's much more that needs to be done, that we can really have a goal to eradicate disparities, especially racial disparities in our programs. So thank you.
Benita, Pretty, do you have anything to add?
Go ahead, Benita.
Can I just add a slight nuance?
Yes, of course. Go ahead, Benita.
Okay, and I think part of the challenge is we even talk about, first of all, thank you both, Councilmember Prince and Councilmember Vaughn. Really appreciate your thoughtful input. A nuance for me, and when I saw that we were focused on discussing structural racism, institutional racism is systematic oppression of everybody, a systematic oppression in which manifests itself in most forms, and the reason that more and more organizations are focusing on racial equity, because if you look at any element of oppression, whether that's classism, sexism, ableism, ageism, social economic status, etc., and look at the demographics, invariably and predictably, people of color will always have the worst outcomes, the most disparate results, the most negative impacts. This is why they say in King County that if you give your zip code, they can give the prediction of your lifespan because of our geographical segregation that exists. So when we talk about racially equitable outcomes, when we talk about achieve equitable outcomes, the nuance for me is that when we're talking about equitable outcomes for all, is along the lines of John Powell's notion of targeted universalism. And John Powell says that if we're going to achieve racial equity, we have to set goals for everyone, and then we must set targeted goals for those who fall furthest behind because of institutional racism. And so when we say all, and he, and as a lot of you know, he's so committed to this ideology that he actually changed what had been the Haas Institute for an Equitable and Just Society to the Institute for Othering and Belonging, because he says in this country, what we do is we other people. They get lots of messages, subtle and direct, that they don't belong. And so somewhere in this, I think that we need to somehow convey that we are focusing on targeted universalism, that we must set goals for everyone, but then we set targeted goals for those who need a little more help because of the historical inequities that they have faced generationally in this country. So I just want to say that. And then the other nuance for me is this. When we talk about structural racism, we're really talking about institutional racism across multiple institutions. So in Renton, that might be the impact of on youth, of institutions of the educational system, which suspends and expels a disproportionate number of youth of color. And then the truancy system, which does not provide the safety net needed once the kids are pushed out of school. And then the juvenile justice system. So if we're dealing with the impact, the ultimate impact of mass incarceration of Black and brown people, we're really dealing with structural racism, because we're dealing with institutional racism across multiple institutions. As a city government, I believe our charge and in fact our circle of influence is institutional racism. The policies, processes, procedures, cultural norms that reside within the city, internally itself, and in the way that services are provided by the city that falls into the community. So it's just a subtle nuance, but I think that we have as an empowerment vehicle, we have all the power we need to address institutional racism in Renton city government, internally and externally. We may not have the same amount of influence on the health system in Renton and the education system in Renton. We can partner with those entities, but then we partner with them to address structural racism. So I just want to share that nuance, because I think more and more what I'm finding is that the language becomes important.
Benita, thank you so much for your wisdom. And I have more council members with questions. So, Councilmember Benedetti.
Thank you so much. I have to say, I am deeply impressed with the move this work to the business plan, because I think it does what it is that we were hoping, which is to not just put words to this, but to put action and to put momentum. And it's the business plan that also drives our budget. And so I think that this is the way that we really get this done. And I just want to commend everybody who has been a part of this decision and this move. I will say that I think that there are a couple of areas where I would like to see, perhaps if not different language, at least some inclusion of some ideas. The first is, I really appreciated what it is that you said about the equity lens and the equity tool that the city is using. I think some mention of it here could really benefit, and that really drives the departments to make sure that they are constantly coming back to that tool. And so I think some commitment there in the business plan would be a really great inclusion. I also think, one of the things that I did say at the council retreat is that I felt that the business plan should not just include the word inclusion, but also have some language specifically relating to anti-racism. And I'm wondering if there's a place here, whether it might be in that, whether that maybe in that last bullet point for the building capacity within the city to implement inclusion, if there's a way to also include the idea of anti-racism, to be actively anti-racist and to seek opportunities to do so. Finally, under the continuing ongoing two-way dialogue with all communities, I think it's important to continue the dialogues we've started. I also think it's important to seek out new opportunities for dialogue. So in addition to continuing to maybe committing to seek more opportunities and seek other venues so that more voices are heard. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Benedetti. Benita, you want to add something, or I can ask Council Corman to ask a question? Okay, Councilmember Corman.
Thank you, President Perez. Yeah, so I also agree. Great work. I really like the progress, and I thank everybody that's worked on this. I also appreciate the comments by my council colleagues. My suggestion is that in the new bullets, the first one where we talk about looking for structural and institutional racism in our internal policies, I would go a step further and say, and our ordinances. As some of our ordinances are 100 years old, and we should really revisit those and look for language that's meaning that's inappropriate. And then I'd like to see us use a tactic maybe where we start choosing those ordinances and starting to work through them. Maybe have a special task force that helps us with that.
Thank you, Councilmember Corman. Councilmember Prince.
Thank you, Madam President. I want to say I appreciate everything that Councilmember Corman and Councilmember Benedetti mentioned. 2 points. One, when we're talking about ordinances, I also think, and maybe someone mentioned it and I just didn't hear it, we also need to talk about contracting opportunities. The city does has a ton of contracting. I think that if we need to use our equity lens on those contracting opportunities as well, to make sure that that diverse businesses are getting opportunities to do business with the city of Renton. My second point is actually one more of a little bit of pride. I'm sitting here and taking in this conversation, and Randy will remember this as well. We didn't put inclusion in our business plan, I don't think, until my first year on the council. So this has been an 8-year journey that we've taken, and we still have so much more work to do. But when we did that, we were pioneers because other cities weren't talking about this like this. And I don't say that as a pat on the back because, like I said, we still have so much more work to do, but more of just an acknowledgement that we've been really intentional about trying to get this working, about, especially as the demographics of South King County change. We've been really intentional about doing this work for the last 9 years, and just wanted to make sure I acknowledge that.
Thank you, Councilmember Prince, and thank you for bringing that knowledge as well to the table. Councilmember O'Halloran.
Yes, I'd like to just echo what's been said, but also I want to say that I feel very, very strongly that the business plan is the right place for us reaffirming and taking our stance. It's what's the guiding principle in front of everybody's desk at City Hall every day. It is what drives the budget. It drives all the work effort. It is absolutely the correct vehicle for moving this forward and making things actionable. And so I'm extremely proud of that. Thank you for that and everybody who put the work into that. And I want to sort of bounce off of something that Councilmember Prince said. And this goes back to a concept that we used in my corporate life, where you put yourself in the middle of a circle and you do a 365-degree look around you at all of the spokes that go out from your circle, which is us as a city, and all of those spokes that come into this city. And you look at every relationship, and that would include your employees. It includes your contractors. It also includes your vendors and your suppliers, your supply chain. And you really analyze what are all of those interactions that you have 365 degrees around you, and what is your circle of influence in those relationships, and how much can you bring to bear in moving others' needles as well as your own. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councilmember O'Halloran. Councilmember McKirby.
Yes, I just want to, I think, agree with a lot of what's been said. Certainly want to chime in as well. I do appreciate the updates. I like, as others have said, the portions that make this an actionable plan more than just a goal-driven plan. I think that's really what we need right now. I think doing that in the business plan absolutely makes sense. I will say, I don't know that it's a mutually exclusive requirement. I think it does make sense as a first step to me, as far as this is setting the foundation, the cornerstone for everything that we do. That would drive additional opportunities. I do appreciate the inclusion, even though I know we've done this in the past, but to put it in the business plan on the educational opportunities, because I think so much of this is going to revolve around the community conversation that I know we are a facilitator of. So if we are hoping to end structural racism, we need, all members of the community participating in that conversation. So I think while we've done a good job of engaging them in the past, or at least to provide the opportunities, the work I think is really getting called on for people to increase their knowledge and learn how to be anti-racist. And I think that that we can be a convener of that conversation. So thank you for the work that went into this.
Thank you very much, Councilmember McIrving. Benita, I do have a question. I have received several phone calls and emails asking about our training, our internal training, not just from staff, but as well as council members. As far as I am aware, at least 3 or 4 of the council members and the mayor, we already have taken the training. I know that the brand new council members have not had the opportunity to do, because this year COVID-19 happened. But if you can explain a little bit more the training that you provide to our cities. It has been very important for people asking us if we do recognize our privilege, for us that are, for the people that are white, because I'm not, but for the people that work in the staff, or the people that are like me, that I'm not black, that if I recognize my level of privilege, and that should be the first step to have an acknowledgement of what is happening to keep moving forward as a city that is inclusive enough. Oh, inclusive for all. I'm sorry, what to say.
I'm going to give you the thumbnail overview, and then if you like, we can also provide you with a more detailed document. Ideally, we'd like you all go to experience the training, especially those of you who haven't. But so we started out with what we called a foundational training, and that was really focusing on helping everyone to understand the notion of institutional racism, because so often, because of the way we're socialized, we tend to blame the victim. Well, those people would just do better if they would just, as opposed to understanding that a lot of people have, because of the hand they've been dealt in life, and certainly just based on their coincidence of birth in this country or immigration to this country, have been dealt a completely different hand due to institutional racism. So one of the pieces that we used was part of the 3-part documentary, Race, the Power of an Illusion, to look at how in this country institutional racism was really part and parcel with the foundation of this country, and how federal laws were actually set in place to uphold them, and how all institutions in this country were required by law to align their policies with the laws of the land. And so, we had things like, how institutional racism became part of the web, if you will. And then we looked at, because we looked at a historical perspective and the legacy that we're left with today. And then we also took a snapshot in looking at, and how does that play out in the city of Renton? What are some inequities today that are evidenced, that are current inequities today based on that legacy? And what can we do about it? And so that was really the introductory piece. And I have to mention this because I'm so proud of my city, once again, in this. Typically, when a part of the capacity building work that I do is that so much of the work I do is just in collaboration, not only with administrators, but directors, managers, frontline people, because I'm there as their technical assistance resource. And so often when I develop training, I ask my client group, in the spirit of building capacity, is there someone that you would like in your organization to co-facilitate those sessions with me, because I'm not going to be here forever, and it deepens your bench. And when I asked that question at one of Mayor's staff meetings, every single administrator in the city said, I'll be your co-facilitator. First time that's ever happened that the top leadership took on that role. And so every one of the sessions, we did small groups. So Pretty, there were 20 some odd sessions, I believe, or maybe more. And every one of those I co-facilitated with one of the administrators, and they did their homework. They came with me one-on-one. They went through a train the trainer. They were prepared. It was a sight to behold, and I still get excited. You can tell. The second workshop then, which was about a year and a half later, was focused on the implicit bias and the impact of implicit bias in decision making, and why it's important we understand what implicit bias is, how it seeps into decisions, and all the things that you've mentioned, whether it's hiring, contracting, which vendors we choose, on and on and on, how we write our policies and ordinances, and so and then some specific strategies that have been proven that if they are deployed consistently and continually will in fact mitigate the impact of implicit bias, and really just helping people understand how, despite our well-intentioned vision, goals, desires, implicit bias can take us 180 from where we want to go. And then the third workshop, inclusion workshop, was really focused on looking at resources and tools that staff could use on a daily basis in their work to embed principles of inclusion. So we looked at the equity lens, we looked at other resources that were available to them, and so forth, and at that session, again, administrators, at every one of those sessions, an administrator came in and shared what they were doing in their department to further inclusion. And then we also had a community member from one of our many communities, different people at each session, come in and share what inclusion meant to their community and some things that it would be helpful for staff to know about their community in order to provide inclusive services. So that was the third session. And then, of course, what was scheduled for this year, what was on the drawing board for this year, got derailed because of COVID. So about every 18 months, there has been a different focus area. So those are the three workshops.
Thank you, Benita.
Council President, just to add, we did 1 year, we brought in WSU to do poverty simulation training. This was not mandatory across the board, but we did have certain groups do this, and this I think was particularly useful when we start talking about marginalized communities, and especially certain areas where we work, where we know that we've got low-income communities. It was an excellent training that we offered to some communities. And then one of the other trainings we've done, this has been with internal and external communities, is a fantastic module. We've also done it for SCA. It's called Under Our Skin, which is offered by the Seattle Times. And it's another wonderful way to look at concepts ranging from color blindness to microaggression to racism. And we've done that done this even internally, as well as looking at our external communities. But I did want to, in the interest of time, also see if we can talk about the resolution and see, and also get your input on, because we've had some discussions on some of the wording for the business plan, and get your input and advice on next steps so that, you know, we can proceed in a way that would meet your needs. But may I put on or share the screen of the resolution to see if it's going in the direction you'd like it to?
Yes, please.
Thank you. Okay. So I'm sharing the screen of the draft resolution when, as you can see, this is, again, framed similar to the resolution that Councilmember Kim Convan provided to us from the city of Evanston, where the first few recitals are talking about the support and the stand against racism. These recitals take from the initiative and proclamation that the city of Renton has already taken, but re-emphasizing that, we have taken a stand against racism, that we have worked diligently to practice inclusion, eliminate inequity through our internal practices, through our initiatives and partnerships with other institutions in our community, and that we value and will end race-based disparities, and then bringing it to the 6-year business plan, which is our ultimate document where we uphold our stand against racism and support racial equity. This is where, as a council, you may want to add some of this language and sentences that we talked about today in terms of eradicating racial disparity, a stronger stand against anti-racism if you'd like, or we can go back and add some of this language in the business plan. One of the things I did want to state is all the things that we talked about, contracting, all of those things are very, very, very much part of the actions that we are, either in the process of or taking, because the business plan, just like any other area, whether it's the Growth Management Act or whether it's any of the other areas, that's our guiding document. That's the place that we look at, and then we flush into details, because obviously that's kind of our starting place, but behind every sentence is its full plan. Like the HR tactical plan is a multi-page effort to make those things happen. And on the one hand, we've done a lot, but on the other hand, we haven't even started scratching the surface. And you all know that, we cannot stop, because this is years and years of work that, if we stop, we haven't started.
Madam President?
Councilmember Corman.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, so I think this is really good. It's definitely a very good start. One thing that jumps out at me is since it really does come down to section 1, and we make the statement in there that we're revising our business plan, I think it would be good to put more words in there about what the business plan really does, something to the effect of the 2021 to 26 business plan, our overriding document which drives all the behavior of all of our staff and all of our decisions during these years, a copy of which is attached, is hereby adopted. Something that makes it more clear for the casual reader that may not be familiar with the business plan that this isn't a document that just goes on the shelf, that it's part of the way we operate the business. So that would just be one suggestion. Just some more language to clarify the significance of that. In fact, just adding to it, you could almost have a second sentence which says, we expect the department heads to incorporate appropriate tactics to align with these changes, or something to that effect.
Okay.
Thank you, Councilmember Corman. Councilmember McKirby.
There you go. Sorry. Wrong button. Thank you. I would definitely agree with what Councilmember Corman just said. I think that's a logical change. The other thing that just jumped out to me, knowing that when we usually read in resolutions, we read in the title and then adopt them. So I think it could be helpful, since we are updating just a component of the business plan. As my understanding, we would there were other items from the treat that we would come back and update later. If it would make sense to call out that we are doing this portion here on racial equity now, and if we could at least maybe specify which portion we're updating in the title, that would help clarify that for someone, as Randy had said, that, just the casual reader just sees, a resolution updating the business plan. They might not know and or read everything that follows. So I think it could be possibly worthwhile to update the title to reflect that as well.
Thank you, Councilmember McKirby. Councilmember Ban.
Yes, thank you, Council President. I think Council, everyone kind of just said what I wanted to say, but on top of that, I wanted to, again, acknowledge and thank you so much for Ms. Benita Horn and Ms. Preeti Star for putting this resolution together. The one thing I wanted for us to look to see if we can incorporate the language that was mentioned by other council members when we were talking about the business plan into the resolution, particularly having, perhaps there is a whereas where, kind of following on the same line with Councilmember Corman, is like directing staff to work on referring to this and implementing it, but also in the line of having terminologies like anti-racist, anti-racism, and I could also send a whereas, several whereas, if you guys are open to that. But certainly, I know it's a very general, 30 feet up kind of a policy until we get to the actual administration, the departments to actually work out on the specific stuff. But I also want to have, by, putting in specifically the fair contracting, we look at revising city ordinances and policies such as hiring and contracting. And I also want to ask my colleagues, because this next one, having talked to community and understanding where different communities are coming from and acknowledging my own privilege as a refugee, I see that in this document, we don't have the historical context to really get us here, as whereas what was proposed previously does talk about the history of Renton. And in some way, if we could incorporate them into this as one or two whereas, that would be great. But just wanted to know my colleagues' perspective on that. Since, we're talking about work on institutionalized racism, but we don't even have the definition of institutionalized racism there. So I think definition is helpful to community members so that we're on the same page, and the historical context of why, of what it is, and that now that we have gone to including folks and what we need to, the next steps.
Thank you, Councilmember Van. Councilmember Prince.
Thank you, Madam President. I understand where my colleagues are coming from, but the one thing that I will caution is that this is just a resolution to adopt it. We need to focus on the living, breathing business plan document and not get so tied up on the resolution. Because once the resolution's read, yes, someone may decide to go back and see it, but what's everywhere in the city is the actual business plan. And so I would spend more time focusing on what the is in the business plan as opposed to what the is in the resolution. Because at the end of the day, staff already knows that the business plan drives their work. I don't think we need to be overly prescriptive in that way. I think we can be prescriptive in the business plan, but I don't think we have to be overly prescriptive in the resolution that we adopt as council.
Thank you, Councilmember Prince, and I will 100% agree with Councilmember Prince on this one. Pri Benita, do you have something else to add at this point?
I just want to share one small tidbit of information about the training. In the year, it was 2015 when we offered the first training, the then council members made a request to go through the training themselves. And in order to have a larger class, administrators went through with them. And what I found was that it was a very deep session, because it was not, because the council members and administrators took it from the ideological or hypothetical and began talking about specific impacts and actions and how this affects decisions we make. I learned a lot myself in that session. So it may be time to have another session like that if at some point, if you all think that would be helpful.
Madam President?
Yes, Councilmember Corbin.
Yeah, I was going to say I learned a lot in that session also. I mean, I learned things that I'm still telling people, today about the history of how we got to where we are. And so I really agree with Ms. Horn that more sessions like that would be really, really valuable.
Thank you, Councilmember Corbin. Pri Benita, do we have something else?
We have, I saw Councilmember O'Halloran's hand, and then
I'm sorry.
We'll ask, some wrap up.
Yeah, Councilmember O'Halloran.
Thank you. So I've really, really appreciated this conversation. It's very, very important. And I guess my question is, what are the next steps? Are we going to go back and do some more work on the business plan and then bring this back for another review, or what does it look like from here?
That was going to be my next question. Perhaps we've got some input from you, some fairly clear input in terms of the resolution, both some clear direction on how we should state that, and definitely a lot of ideas on some language for the business plan. Perhaps Benita and I can put our heads together, and you can also send us your input while this is still fresh. And we can gather that, have another work session, and Council President, you can let us know the best way for us to bring this back to you. And, we also will do this obviously with mayor and administrators, so that once we can bring this back with your suggestions, and then it is for the council to review and then adopt the plan. That's, the way it goes. But we want to gather the input we've got from you, and then put it forth in a document that meets your requirements and then gets adopted.
Yeah, Madam President?
Yes, Councilmember O'Halloran.
And just one follow-on question to something that Councilmember McCurvin mentioned earlier. I'd also like to know what are the next steps and what's our potential timeline on addressing the other changes that we had discussed, other changes to the business plan that we had discussed at the council retreat. What does the timing look like on that? Thank you.
Pretty.
In terms of the actual wording, the most critical other change was in the goal area of support plan, growth, and influence decisions that impact the city. That was the broad area. And within that area, there was a specific goal area on environmental protection, where the language was to add something specific to our carbon neutral and sustainability. I would seek the council's input on whether that is something that the council seeks to do this year or to hold that until next year, given the fact that we are in this state of, COVID and budget changes.
Thank you, Preeti. I would like to hear what other council members have to say about this, but since right now as you mentioned, we cannot meet because of the COVID-19. It's something that we can bring back to the council whenever we want. But if we want right now to make the changes on the business plan to be reflected right now about our stand and our strongest stand and commitment towards racial equity and eliminate racial injustice, we can make these changes right now and then bring it back later in the year, not to review the business plan, but the changes that we are going to be making in the future. But I don't know, Councilmember Halloran. I will ask the other council members if any of them have, Councilmember Benedetti.
Yes, thank you so much, Council President. My only concern in delaying is, and understand that I absolutely agree that we are trying to do a lot right now and in an environment where it's difficult to do the full process and really get in the full discussion that we need in order to make some of these changes. My only concern is that we are in a budget year and the business plan drives the budget, and so there were some priorities that were mentioned that might have budget implications, and I just don't want that to be lost. Understanding, of course, that we might have to delay it just simply because of the time. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councilmember Benedetti. Councilmember Corman.
Yes, thank you, Madam President. I was going to suggest that on the institutional racism, maybe we're at a point where we could ask the staff to, by maybe Thursday, forward a proposal for new resolution wording and the final sort of business plan wording to us, to where, and I don't want to push them too hard, but maybe to where we could adopt it at our next council meeting, and then take up the topic separately of the other changes we might want to that business plan. And so I guess what I'm trying to say is I think we're getting close to completing this first initial step on the institutional racism, which would probably allow us to move to the other topic. I also wanted to, while I have the floor, suggest that another place we could then go with this, after we make this business plan change. One idea I had was maybe we could, in a few weeks, ask each of the committees to hold a special session or a special agenda item where each of our 6 council committees could actually sort of talking with the departments they work with, whether it's transportation or community services or public safety, could talk about what this change to the business plan might mean for the work items in that committee. And that would be a way to keep momentum moving on this and still, clear the committee of the whole so that we could take up carbon neutrality or something like that.
Thank you, Councilmember Corman. Councilmember Prince.
And I will make this real quick because I know we're running out of time. The only change I would make to what Randy said about this Thursday, since there's not a council meeting this coming up week, I'd push that to the following Thursday, just to have more time, so that we're not, I would just, just a little bit more leeway since we don't have a council meeting next week.
Thank you, Councilmember Prince. That's a good improvement.
Yeah. Thank you, Councilmember Prince. We are really running out of time, but I want to say something. We can bring the resolution certainly next Thursday. One of the only issues that I have about the business plan, doing it twice, which I agree with Councilmember Benedetti, is that if at the end of the day our budget is driven by the business plan, we may want to consider to add the other items that we discussed during our retreat. And I always very, very concerned about the large cost to keep publishing different documents and the confusion. So even though we can publish next year, I want to be consistent. So let me have a conversation with the administration about this when we can bring it back, and then I will keep you posted if that is okay with everybody.
Okay. Sounds good.
Once again, Pretty Benita, thank you very much. This was very enlightening. I'm very proud of both of you. Thank you for thinking about including this topic to our business plan. Definitely, I think if our idea is not just to send a strong message, but also actually to take action on our commitment to end structural racism and racial injustice. So I think this is a great steps because we are also prioritizing and budgeting for racial equity in Renton. So with that, I thank absolutely everybody, and I adjourn this meeting. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Council President.